In this video, I'm going to compare the Sony 50mm f1.8 OSS versus the Sony FE 50mm f1.8. I'm going to go over the main similarities and differences between these two lenses and tell you which one you should buy if you're looking to get a 50mm lens. So right off the bat, these two lenses are pretty similar. They're both around the same size, with the FE being a little bit smaller than the OSS. They're both, of course, made by Sony, so they have Sony's build quality, Sony's autofocus capabilities, and they're going to work perfect with any Sony mirrorless camera. And of course, they're both 50mm lenses, so they're both the same focal length depending on what camera you use. So one thing to note is that the Sony E50mm OSS is an APS-C lens for APS-C cameras, and the Sony FE 50mm is, of course, the FE version for the full-frame mirrorless cameras. So right off the bat, if you're looking at getting one of these lenses for your Sony A7 or A9 series camera or any full-frame Sony camera, you're going to want to just go straight for the FE 50mm because the Sony OSS lens will not work in full-frame mode and you're going to have to crop in on the sensor, so it's not going to get the full potential out of that lens. So straight off the bat, if you have a full-frame Sony camera, go for the Sony FE 50mm. However, if you have a Sony a6000 series or NEX camera or any sort of crop sensor Sony camera, both of these lenses are going to provide the same field of view equivalent, which would be about 75mm with the crop sensor. And that's where the comparisons are really going to come in handy between these two lenses to figure out which one you should buy. Now these two lenses are very similar. There really isn't a whole lot of differences between them, but I'm going to go ahead and outline the main differences as well as show you some back-to-back comparison photos that I took with these two lenses on the same camera with all the same settings, so that you can really compare them and see if there's any big difference to you, and I'll talk about the differences that I noticed between these two lenses. So this is going to be a pretty quick video because, like I said, these lenses are very similar. There's only a few key differences between them, but I will have a final say at the end of the video of which one I think is better, so definitely watch the whole video and stay tuned. So like always, I'll leave links to both of these lenses down in the description if you want to check them out and buy them through my affiliate links. If you do buy them through those links, I will get a small kickback at no extra cost to you, so it'll help my channel out, help me create more of these videos for you, and to get yourself a nice new lens. Alright, so the first comparison is going to be, of course, the price. That's probably the first thing everybody's going to look at when they look at these two lenses. And so the 50mm OSS lens is $350, and the Sony FE 50mm lens is only $200. And so at first glance, there's a pretty big difference in price between these two lenses, but there is some different features to note that really account for that price difference. So the 50mm OSS lens, of course, has optical steady shot. That's what the OSS stands for, which means it has stabilization built right into it. And so this will allow for smoother videos and allow for longer exposure photos while still getting a really sharp image. Now, depending on what type of photo and video work you do, this can really help you out a bunch, or it can really not matter to you at all. If you do a lot of handheld video or you do a lot of handheld photos at slower shutter speeds, like in low light conditions, the optical steady shot can really save the day and get you that sharp image or stable video, where the FE 50mm without image stabilization would ruin your shot or really just make it harder for you to get stable footage or a stable photo. Alright, so the next difference to note between these two lenses is that the OSS 50mm has a closer focus distance than the FE. Now, it isn't a super huge difference, but I'll show some photos to show you the difference between the close focus distance. So if you really want to get close-up photos or videos for like product photography or any sort of really close-up shots, the 50mm OSS is going to be the better option. Now, a plus side for the FE 50mm is that it does have quieter autofocus. It's actually almost silent autofocus, whereas the OSS 50mm has a little bit of noisy autofocus. It's nothing crazy, but it is a lot noisier than the FE 50mm lens. Now, the last physical difference to note between these lenses is that the OSS lens is bigger and heavier than the 50mm FE. Again, this is another thing that isn't a super big difference, and they're both fairly similar in size, but the OSS lens is bigger, but it isn't a super huge difference between the two. It's just something that really depends on what you'd prefer. And so that really wraps up the main differences between these two lenses when it comes to build quality and features. But the most important part is, of course, image quality. So I went out and took some photos with these two lenses using my Sony a6000 with the exact same settings with both of them in pretty much the same framing. I tried to get these photos as close as I could between these two lenses so I can really compare the image quality between the two. Alright, and so after looking at these photos back to back and really looking for the differences, here's what I noticed. Overall, the Sony 50mm OSS lens is sharper and has less chromatic aberration than the FE 50mm lens. Now, this isn't a huge difference and they both take great photos. However, the OSS lens definitely is a little bit sharper, has less chromatic aberration, and just produces a better quality image. Now it's kind of expected for the almost double price point of the 50mm FE lens, but it's definitely something to note that if you do want the best quality lens out of these two, the OSS lens is definitely sharper. And mixing that with the OSS in this lens, which will give you a sharper image handheld at lower shutter speeds, is overall the better option if you want the best image quality. But like I said, both of these lenses take great photos, and if you really don't have the budget for the $350 OSS lens, and you just want a nice portrait lens, a nice 50mm lens for your camera, the 50mm FE lens will almost always get the job done for what you need. And so that wraps up the differences between these two lenses. They're both great lenses, but I would say if you want the best quality option, you're definitely going to want to get the 50mm OSS lens. But that wraps this video up. Make sure to go out and hit the like button and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video.